Chapter 78. Sore Spots. Karasor. Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. A sore spot is one which reacts abnormally and violently, however gently you touch it. More, all the other bits of you give a painful jerk, however disconnected they may seem. Still more, the entire system undergoes a spasm of apprehension, and the total result is that the mental as well as the physical system is quite unable to grasp the situation with any accuracy, and the whole man is temporarily engulfed in what is naturally not far from a condition of insanity. In, shall I say, Anglo Saxondom, or Teutonic breeds, or Burgess, so as to include some of the French, whom, when they are good, are very good indeed, but when they are bad, they are horrid. The presiding gods of this trinity are sex, religion, drugs, and the greatest of these is sex, actually, the main root of which the other two are tough and twisted stems, each with its peculiar species of poisonous flowers, sometimes superficially so attractive that their nastiness passes for beauty. I shall leave it to the psychoanalyst to demonstrate the reduction to sex, merely remarking that though I agree with their analysis as far as it goes, I do not allow it to stop where they do. For us, sex is the first unconscious manifestation of kaya, the creative energy, and although, like everything else, it is shown both on the spiritual and the physical planes, its most important fourth showing is on the magical plane, because it actually produces phenomena which partake of all these. It is the true will on the creative plane. By wisdom formed he the worlds. So soon as its thaumaturgy is accomplished, it is through Bana, understood as the Logos. Thus, in sex, we find every one of the primary correspondences of Chakma. Being thus ineffable and sacrosanct, it is plainly enough peculiarly liable to profanation. Being profaned, it is naturally more unspeakably nasty than any other of the mysteries. You will find a good deal on this subject implied in Artemis Iota, attached in another of my letters to you. Before tackling sore spots seriously, there is, after all, one point which should be made clear as to this Trinitarian simplification. One of the most interesting and fruitful periods of my life was when I was involved in research as to the meaning of sankhara. Tendencies may be, indeed is, a good enough translation, but it leaves one very much as deeply in the dark as before. You remember, I hope, that Sankhara lies between Vinam, pure consciousness, and Sana, perception. For instance, an electric fan in motion. A housefly tends to see the veins as we do when they are still. We tend to see a diaphanous blur. Then, in delirium tremens, why do we tend to see pink rats rather than begonas or gazelles? We tend to see the myriad flashing colors of the hummingbird. The bird itself does not. It has no apparatus of color sense. To him, all appears a neutral tint, varying only in degrees of brightness. Such were some of the fundamental facts that directed the course of my research, whose results you may read in The Psychology of Hashish by Oliver Haddo in The Equinox, Volume 1, Number 2. The general basis of this essay is Sankhara. It shows how very striking are the analogies between 1. The results obtained by mystics. This includes the ecstasy of sexual feeling, as you may read in pretty nearly all of them, from St. Augustine to St. Teresa and the nun Gertrude. The stages recounted by the Buddha in his psychological analysis correspond with almost incredible accuracy. 2. The phenomena observed by those who use opium, hashish, and some other drugs. 3. the phenomena of various forms of insanity. The facts of this research are infuriating to the religious mystic, and the fact of its main conclusion is liable to drive him so delirious a frenzy of rage as to make one reach for one's notebook. One more typical extreme case. None, of course, very few religious persons know that they are mystics. Already it annoys them to suggest it. But whether the lady doth protest too much or too little, the fact is that they are. There is no true rational meaning in religion. Consider the Athanasian Creed itself. This dilemma, consciously or subconsciously, is well rooted in the minds of everybody who takes life, in any one of its forms, seriously. He feels the touch of the sword, however shrewdly or cautiously wielded. The salute itself is more than enough. He feels already the thrust to his vitals. To every man and woman that has not seen sex as it is, faced it, mastered it, you will find elsewhere in these letters sufficient on this matter. It is his secret guilt. Imagine then how, at any reference, however remote, the sinner quails, his inmost mystery laid bare, his evil conscience holding up a tarnished mirror to his deformed and hideous face. Often enough, he does not mind gross jests which admit complicity on the part of the other, but any allusion to the truth, and his soul shrieks, I am found out. Then apoplectic fear puts on the mask of indignation and disgust. As for a serious discussion of anything concerned therewith, why, every word is a new rasping terror. The mind takes refuge in irrational and irrelevant outbursts of feigned rage and horror. I wonder how many lunatics there are in the bug house today. In the times of evangelical revival, the number was fantastic, who got there through fear that they had somehow committed that aforesaid blasphemy against the Holy Ghost. The unknown again. The Bible does not tell us what it is, only that it is unpardonable. Nor grace, nor faith, nor predestination avail in the least. For all you know, you may have committed it. Reassurance is impossible. No censure de chastet avails to avert this danger. Again, with drugs, it is the unknown which is the horrific factor. Most people get their information on the subject from the yellowest of yellow newspapers, magazines, and novels. So darkly deep is their ignorance that they do not know what the word means. Like us so often, yes? Wide sections of the USA are scared of tea and coffee. They bleach when you point out that bicarbonate of soda is a drug just as much as cocaine. At the same time, they literally shovel in the really dangerous aspirin, to say nothing of the thousand patent medicines blared at them from every radio, as if the press were not enough to poison the whole population. Blank eyed, they gasp when they learn that of all the classes, the first place among drug addicts is that of the doctor. But the crisis in which fear becomes phobia is the unreasoning aversion, the shuddering of panic. Above all, the passionate refusal to learn anything about drugs, to analyze the conditions, still less to face them, and the spasmodic invention of imaginary terrors, as if real dangers were not enough to serve as a warning. Not why. Surely because in the subconscious lies an instinct that in these obscure medicines indeed lies the key of some forbidden sanctuary. There is a fascination as irrational and therefore as strong as the fear. Here is the point at which they link up with sex and religion. Oh, how well nigh almighty is the urgency to him who reads those few great writers who understood the subject from experience, De Quincey, Ludlow, Poe, Boulder, and to whom burn the pointed parallels between their adventures and those of all the mystics, East and West. The worst of this correspondence form is that you are always asking simple elementary questions which require half a dozen treaties to answer. So take this with my blessing. Love is the law. Love under will. Fraternally. P.S. One further reflection. With all these sore spots is closely linked the idea of cruelty. I need not touch upon the relation of cruelty to sex. The theme has been worn threadbare. But in religion, note the bottomless pit and the eternal flame. In Buddhism, the 18 hot and 18 cold hells, with many another beneath. Hindus have countless hells, even pedestrian, precise Islam. In the calculating Kabbalists, each boast of 7. Again, with drugs, as with insanity, we are confronted constantly with nameless terrors. The idea of formlessness, of infinity, pervades them alike. Consider the man who takes every chance gesture of a stranger in the street as a secret sign passed from one of his persecutors to another. Consider those who refuse food because of the mysterious conspiracy to poison them. All sanity, which is all science, is founded upon limit. You must be able to cut off, to define, and to measure. Naturally, then, their opposites, insanity and religion, have for their prime characteristic the indefinable, incomprehensible, immeasurable. The healing virtue of these words is this: examine the sore spot, analyze it, probe it, then disinfection, and the vis mediatrix natura, complete the cure. I had just finished this when it comes to your very pertinent supplementary postcard. Doesn't hypocrisy fit in here somehow? Indeed, it does, my child. Corresponding to, and the poison bacillus of, that center of infection is a trinity of pure evil, the total abnegation of Thelema, well known to the psychoanalysts, the name thereof shame, guilt, fear. The Anglo Saxon or Burgess mentality is soaked therein, and his remedy, so far from our exploratory disinfection method, is to hide the gangrene mass with dirty poultices. He has always a text of scripture or some other authority to paint his phallus acts in glowing colors. And if he wants a glass of beer, he hates the stuff. But doctor's orders, my boy, doctor's orders. There is really nothing new to be said about hypocrisy. It has been analyzed, exposed, lashed by every great artist, quite without effect. It gets worse as the socialistic idea thrives, as the individual leans ever harder on the moral support of the herd. P.S. Here's a very different set of reactions. I do not quite know why I'm putting it in. Is it some subconscious attraction of my own? Anyhow, here it is. Call it La Poule aux Rats. Time: a fine Sunday evening in June, just 1 and 20 years ago. Place: Paris, just off the Place des Tertres, overlooking the city. A large and lovely studio, paneled in oak. Strange, it was completely bare, and so far as one could see, it had no door. The skylights, mindful, were carefully screened with broidered stuff. A gallery, some 10 feet from the floor, ran round one corner. Here was a buffet, loaded with priceless wines and liquors of all sorts, except the soft and excellent variety of all cold snack refreshments. One gained it by a staircase from the lower floor. By the buffet, the old butler. Oh, for a painter to portray his weariness of evil wisdom. Our host led us to the gallery. We ate and drank and saw, not God also, but the lady responsible for the heavy tread upon the stairs. A woman of the Hall Centrales, in her early 40s, coarse, brutal, ugly, robust, square set, curiously radiant with some magnetic form of energy. I cannot describe her clothes for lack of material. She greeted us all round with a sort of surely good humor. The butler took a pot of very far gone Roquefort cheese and smeared her all over. She drank to us and clumped away downstairs. She came out into the studio from under the gallery, braced herself, and shook her mop of hair as if about to wrestle, waved to us, and waited. A minute later, a small trap at the far end of the studio was smartly pulled up. In rushed 100 starving rats. There was a moment's hesitation, but the smell of the cheese was too much, and they rushed her. She caught one in both hands, bit through its spine, and flung it aside. Softly repeating to myself passages from The Revenge by the late Alfred Lord Tennyson, of which the scene most powerfully reminded me, rat after rat, for half an hour, flung back as fast as it came. Their courage wilted. The hunted became the huntress. I thought of Artemis as I sang softly to myself, when the hounds of spring are on one winter's traces. But she pursued, snapped the last spine, and flung it into the gallery with a yell of triumph. It was not so easy a victory as I had perhaps described it. Once she slipped in the slime and came down with a thud, and at the end blood spurted from innumerable bites. The whole scene was too much for most of the men. They literally howled like famished wolves and shook the balustrade until it creaked and groaned. Presently, one slipped over, let himself lightly to the floor, and charged. Others followed. All had their heart's desire. I was reminded of Swinburne's Las Veneris. I let mine eyes have all their will of thee. I seal myself upon thee with my might. As for the women, the ferocious glitter of their eyes was almost terrifying. One of them, true, would have joined the happy warriors below, but the butler roughly pulled her back, saying in a shocked voice, Madame est normale. I enjoyed that. Others consoled themselves by capturing those males who were too timid to risk the jump. I swallowed a last glass of champagne, and then je filais à Anglaise. Summary: a pleasant time was had by all. Note for political economists: the woman took 10,000 francs at about 125 to the pound. She took 3 weeks in the hospital and 3 weeks holiday between the shows. She was, or had been, the mistress of a minister with pupil ideas, though he was an aristocrat of very old vintage, and he helped her to have her daughters brought up in one of the most exclusive convents in France.